A millionaire mocked a woman working as a cleaner, daring her to fly his private jet as a cruel joke. Everyone laughed, expecting her embarrassment. But what no one knew was that she carried a powerful secret from her past, one that would leave the entire crowd stunned and turn the tables on the arrogant. Millionaire! The night air buzzed with wealth and vanity as James Harrington welcomed his elite circle of friends to his private hangar. Inside, chandeliers sparkled against polished steel walls, the glossy floors reflecting the shimmer of diamond necklaces and golden cufflinks. Waiters floated through the room with trays of champagne, while chefs arranged delicate hors d'oeuvres that few even touched. A sleek private jet gleamed under the hangar lights like a monument to James's fortune. He strolled proudly among his guests, soaking in their admiration as if it were another currency he owned. Laughter followed him wherever he went, every word he spoke received with nods and approval, and he basked in the sense that he was untouchable. As the party swelled with conversation and music, a quieter figure moved in the background. Amelia, dressed in a simple uniform, pushed her cart of supplies toward the corner of the hangar. Her steps were light, her eyes lowered, and her work silent, almost invisible against the noise of luxury and privilege. She wiped down surfaces, picked up discarded glasses, and carried herself with the steady patience of someone used to being overlooked. But her presence did not remain unnoticed for long. James, ever eager to flaunt his dominance, caught sight of her passing near his circle of laughing friends. He paused mid-story and smirked, the gleam in his eyes sharp with mischief. "Look at this," he announced loudly, his voice booming to draw attention. "Even my parties come with in-flight cleaning service." His friends chuckled, their laughter carrying the sting of mockery. Amelia stopped briefly, her grip tightening on the handle of her cart, but she did not look up or answer. The guests leaned closer, curious where James's arrogance might take him next. Fueled by the admiration he craved, James stepped forward and blocked Amelia's path. "Tell me," he said, his tone dripping with mock politeness. "Do you think you're qualified to be here, surrounded by people who actually own the sky?" His guests laughed again, their jewels and glasses catching the light as their faces beamed with amusement. Amelia finally looked up, her expression calm, her dark eyes reflecting neither anger nor shame. She simply studied him for a moment, and that quiet stare unsettled James far more than he wanted to admit. Not one to back down. James raised his voice, determined to turn her silence into a spectacle. He motioned grandly toward the jet behind him, its silver body gleaming like a prize. "Tell you what," he declared, drawing a dramatic pause. "If you can fly this plane, I'll marry you right here and now. But you're just a cleaner, aren't you? What would you know about engines, controls, or flight paths?" His words rolled off his tongue like a challenge he thought impossible to lose. The guests roared with laughter, clutching their glasses and leaning into the absurdity of the dare. Phones were lifted discreetly to record the moment, ready to capture the cleaner's humiliation. Some whispered mock bets on how quickly she would crumble, while others egged James on, reveling in the cruel game. Amelia, however, did not flinch. She tilted her head slightly, her lips curling into the faintest smile, one that carried no anger, no embarrassment, only a quiet confidence that none of them could decipher. Her composure stood in stark contrast to the hysteria around her, and the room seemed, for a heartbeat, to hesitate. James's smirk faltered, though he quickly masked it with laughter of his own. From a step behind, Charles Bennett, James's assistant, shifted uncomfortably. He had served James long enough to recognize the line between playful arrogance and reckless cruelty, and tonight, James was crossing it. His eyes flicked to Amelia, and something about the steadiness of her expression unsettled him. But Charles remained silent, hands folded neatly behind his back, unwilling to challenge his employer in front of so many witnesses. The tension stretched as James repeated the dare with more bravado, his friends cheering and clapping as though the challenge were already won. To them, Amelia was nothing more than background, a character without voice or value. Yet Amelia did not break her silence. Instead, she let her small smile linger, her eyes fixed on James with a patience that seemed almost deliberate. She gave no defense, no protest, no denial of the challenge. Her silence itself became an answer, one that rattled James more than any words could have. For the rest of the party, laughter swelled and the game carried on, but the image of that smile lingered in the back of James's mind. He poured himself another glass of champagne, laughed louder than anyone else, and assured himself that he had put her in her place. Still, beneath the noise of celebration and the pride that fueled his arrogance, a whisper of unease had taken root. Amelia had not acted like a woman humiliated. She had acted like a woman who knew something he didn't. And though James refused to admit it, that thought unsettled him more than he cared to say aloud. The laughter from the earlier dare still echoed through the hangar when James, emboldened by the attention of his wealthy guests, decided to push the spectacle further. He strutted toward the gleaming jet, its silver body reflecting the lights of the party, and motioned for Amelia to follow. His hand rested on her shoulder for a brief second, a gesture half mocking, half commanding, as he guided her toward the cockpit. "Come on," he said loudly enough for everyone to hear. "Let's give my guests a real show. Let's see if our cleaner can play pilot for a night." The guests erupted again, some clapping, others pulling out their phones to capture the humiliation they were certain would unfold. Amelia did not resist. Her face remained calm, her movements unhurried, as though she were being led to something she already understood better than the man mocking her. When they reached the stairs to the jet, James stood back with an exaggerated bow, his arrogance dripping from every gesture. "Ladies and gentlemen," he declared, "tonight history will be made. Either this woman proves me wrong or she proves me right." His smirk widened, expecting only one outcome. But Amelia paused at the bottom of the stairs and turned to face him. Her voice was steady, unshaken, carrying an edge of quiet challenge. "Are you sure you want to see what I can do?" she asked. For the first time that evening, her words sliced through the laughter and chatter, leaving a momentary silence in their wake. James blinked, caught off guard by her composure, but quickly recovered with a dismissive laugh. "Oh, absolutely," he said, raising his glass to the crowd. "We're all dying to see." Yet beneath his mocking tone, a flicker of unease stirred. Phones tilted forward as Amelia ascended the stairs with graceful steps. Guests leaned closer, whispering to each other about the absurdity of the scene. They anticipated her fumbling with the controls, her embarrassment turning into their entertainment. But when Amelia slid into the pilot's seat, everything shifted. Her hands moved with practiced ease, fingertips brushing over switches and levers like an artist reacquainting herself with her canvas. She adjusted the seat instinctively, checked the panels with a trained eye, and began murmuring under her breath. The words weren't random guesses, but the precise language of aviation, technical checks, system verifications, and sequences that no ordinary cleaner would know. The murmurs of the guests grew louder, confusion replacing amusement. Some lowered their phones, glancing at one another uncertainly, while others leaned in closer, determined to catch every detail. James forced a laugh, though it sounded thinner now, and turned toward his assistant. "She's bluffing," he whispered. "She's just saying things to sound smart." But Charles, his brow furrowed, shook his head slightly. "She doesn't look like she's bluffing, sir. She looks like she's remembering." James scowled, brushing the doubt aside. "Nonsense, just wait. She'll make a fool of herself." Inside the cockpit, Amelia's hands moved with unwavering confidence. She adjusted knobs, flipped switches in a deliberate sequence, and pressed buttons with the certainty of someone who had done it countless times before. Her posture straightened, her eyes focused, her calmness radiating a quiet power. With a smooth motion, she reached for the throttle and engaged the startup sequence. A low hum vibrated through the hangar, rising steadily as the jet's systems came alive. The lights on the control panels illuminated one by one, casting a glow across Amelia's composed face. A gasp rippled through the crowd. Guests stepped back instinctively as the engine roared to life, the sound filling the space with authority that silenced every laugh. Amelia didn't flinch. She continued narrating each step in a calm, confident voice, explaining how the fuel pumps activated, how the electrical systems engaged, how the turbines spun into motion. Every word was precise, every action exact, and the jet responded to her touch like an obedient partner. James's hand tightened around his champagne glass. He leaned closer to Charles, his whisper harsh. "This is going too far. I didn't think she'd actually—" Charles cut him off softly, his voice almost reverent. "She knows exactly what she's doing." James's smirk faltered, and for the first time that evening, uncertainty cracked through his facade. He tried to laugh it off, raising his voice for the benefit of the crowd. "She's just pressing buttons. Anyone could do that. It's luck, nothing more." But his words fell flat as the jet's engine roared louder, shaking the hangar with its power. Amelia's calm explanations carried over the noise, her tone steady and professional, as though she were teaching a class rather than proving herself to a room full of doubters. The crowd, once eager for her humiliation, now stood frozen in disbelief, their eyes wide, their phones capturing not a spectacle of mockery but a revelation none of them had expected. James forced another laugh, but it was strained, hollow, betrayed by the tightness in his jaw. He watched as Amelia's fingers danced across the controls with precision that stripped away any doubt of luck. The jet was alive under her command, and the balance of power in the room had shifted completely. The mockery that had begun as a cruel game was unraveling before his eyes, and the quiet cleaner he had ridiculed was no longer the object of laughter. She was the center of awe. The roar of the engines filled the hangar, vibrating through the polished floor and silencing every mocking voice that had risen earlier in the night. Amelia sat in the cockpit with an unshakable calm, her hands steady on the controls, her voice smooth as she explained each sequence she had initiated. "This switch engages the auxiliary power unit. These dials regulate the fuel flow, and once the turbines reach operating speed, the system stabilizes itself," she said, her tone more like that of an instructor than a cleaner entertaining a cruel dare. The guests stared at her, wide-eyed and breathless, unable to reconcile the woman they had laughed at minutes earlier with the commanding presence now bringing a jet to life before their eyes. James's skin had grown pale beneath the glow of the hangar lights. The confident smirk that had seemed welded to his face was gone, replaced by a tightness around his mouth and a restless flicker in his eyes. His glass of champagne shook slightly in his hand, though he tried to hide it behind forced laughter. "Impressive. Really impressive," he said, his voice strained. "She must have watched some videos or something." But no one laughed with him. His guests stood motionless, their admiration redirected toward Amelia, their disapproval now quietly aimed at him. Amelia turned her head slightly, her expression calm, her words steady as though she had anticipated this moment all along. "You think this is chance?" "No. These controls, these systems, they've been part of my life for years. I wasn't always a cleaner." She paused, letting her words sink in as the hum of the engines filled the silence. "I was an Air Force pilot. I trained under the best, and I flew missions most people can't even imagine. I served until tragedy forced me to walk away from the skies I loved. Cleaning became a way to survive, not who I am." A ripple of shock moved through the crowd. Whispers rose and fell, disbelief mixing with awe as the guests exchanged glances. They looked at Amelia with new eyes, their earlier amusement now replaced with respect. The woman they had dismissed as invisible had suddenly revealed herself as someone extraordinary, carrying a history that none of them could have guessed. Even the ones who had cheered the loudest at James's mockery now lowered their phones, ashamed to have been part of it. From the back of the hangar, a figure who had been quietly observing stepped forward. His presence commanded attention without effort, and when Amelia's gaze fell on him, her lips curved into a faint, knowing smile. Captain Reynolds, silver-haired and broad-shouldered, emerged from the crowd. His voice, rich with authority and pride, cut through the murmurs. "Every word she says is true. Amelia Johnson was one of the finest pilots I ever trained. She flew with courage, precision, and honor. When others hesitated, she soared. The Air Force lost a gem when she left, but her skill, her discipline, her heart. None of that ever left her. The silence that followed his words was thick with realization. Guests who moments ago had scoffed at Amelia now broke into applause, some clapping hesitantly at first, then with growing enthusiasm as admiration swelled. The sound echoed in the hangar, a chorus of respect rising for the woman who had been mocked only to reveal a greatness none of them had expected. Amelia remained seated in the cockpit, her posture graceful, her dignity intact, receiving their applause without vanity. James, caught in the center of his own undoing, attempted to salvage his pride. He let out a nervous laugh, tugging at his collar as though the air had grown too hot around him. Well, of course I was joking. Just a bit of fun, really? No one expected this. Not at all. His words tumbled awkwardly, their weakness exposing the cracks in his arrogance. The very crowd that had fueled his mockery now watched him with thinly veiled disapproval. Their eyes cool, their respect evaporated. Amelia finally rose from the cockpit, stepping down the stairs with the same quiet composure she had carried all evening. She faced James, her eyes steady, her voice clear and calm. "You should never measure a person's worth by their job title," she said. "Respect is earned, not mocked. Every person has a story you cannot see, and you reveal more about yourself by how you treat them than by what you own." Her words lingered in the air, sharp and unyielding, and the shift in the atmosphere was undeniable. Guests who had once clung to James's every boast now avoided his gaze, their admiration redirected entirely toward Amelia. Some approached her with handshakes, others with words of gratitude and awe, eager to show respect that had been absent before. James stood among them, his pride shattered, his reputation unraveling before his eyes, while Amelia carried herself with the quiet dignity of someone who had nothing left to prove. The events of that night traveled far beyond the polished floor of James Harrington's hangar. By the following morning, whispers had already begun to ripple through the city's social circles, carrying with them the story of a cleaner who had silenced an entire room of millionaires by bringing a private jet to life with the ease of a seasoned pilot. Within days, newspapers and online outlets picked up the tale, turning Amelia from an invisible figure into an unlikely headline. She was no longer spoken of as the woman who scrubbed glasses and polished floors, but as the hidden hero who had humbled a man defined by his wealth. The videos taken at the party spread across social media, showing her steady hands on the controls, her calm explanations, and the stunned faces of the guests. Comment sections filled with admiration, calling her an inspiration and a reminder that true value is often hidden behind quiet humility. Journalists began to search for her, eager to know the story behind the mystery woman who had stunned a millionaire. They discovered her past service in the Air Force, her decorated career as a pilot, and the personal tragedy that had forced her to step away. Instead of pity, the world offered her respect. Universities invited her to speak to students about perseverance, and aviation schools asked her to return as an instructor. Offers came not just from within the country, but from abroad. Institutions wanting her wisdom and her story to inspire the next generation. Invitations poured in, but Amelia remained composed. She accepted opportunities that aligned with her passion, but she did not allow the sudden fame to cloud her sense of self. While Amelia's reputation blossomed, James's began to crumble. At first, he tried to brush the incident aside, calling it a misunderstanding or a joke taken too far. But the footage of him mocking Amelia played on loop across platforms, his words, "You're just a cleaner, aren't you?" forever tied to his name. His arrogance was no longer charming to his business partners, but toxic, a weakness rather than a sign of power. Potential deals slipped through his fingers, investors questioned his judgment, and the same guests who had once admired his boldness now avoided his company. Behind closed doors, some of them admitted that Amelia's dignity had made James's cruelty look all the more pitiful. Charles, his loyal assistant, watched the decline closely. For years he had stood by James, cleaning up the messes arrogance often left behind, but this time was different. The night at the hangar had planted something in him, an unease that grew into conviction. After another meeting in which James ranted about being unfairly judged, Charles calmly placed his resignation letter on the desk. "I can't follow someone who doesn't understand integrity," he said. "I'd rather work for someone who treats people with respect, regardless of their title." James stared at him in disbelief, but Charles left without hesitation. His departure another crack in the empire James had built on pride. Amelia, meanwhile, continued her work with the same humility she had carried before the world knew her name. She still polished tables and wiped floors at times, not because she needed to, but because she believed no task was beneath her. When asked why she hadn't abandoned it completely, she smiled and explained that humility was not something you discarded once success found you. It grounded her, reminded her of where she came from, and kept her connected to the people who often went unseen. At the same time, she balanced new roles, speaking at events, mentoring young pilots, and re-entering aviation on her own terms. One evening, weeks after the party, James sought her out. His face carried the exhaustion of a man who had been fighting battles he could no longer win. He approached her quietly, away from cameras and crowds, his tone stripped of arrogance for the first time. "Amelia," he began, his voice faltering, I owe you an apology. Maybe I was wrong. Maybe when I said I'd marry you if you flew the plane, I meant it more than I knew. Perhaps we could start over." His words, clumsy and uncertain, hung in the air like a plea. Amelia studied him for a long moment, her eyes kind but unwavering. Then she offered a small smile, the same calm expression she had worn that night in the hangar. "I don't need a ring from you to prove my worth," she said softly. "Respect was all I ever wanted." With that, she turned and walked away, her figure steady and dignified as James stood in silence, his mouth half open, his pride crumbling into dust. The story closed not with the sound of engines or the applause of a crowd, but with the quiet weight of truth. True strength isn't in wealth nor in status, but in resilience, humility, and hidden courage. The world learned that night never to underestimate someone simply because of the uniform they wear or the job they hold. For their story may carry chapters capable of silencing arrogance and inspiring millions.